few years back, I decided I was in dire need of a major life overhaul. It felt like everything was spiraling downward. My finances were a mess. My mental health was in shambles. My life was just bleak. I'd sometimes go weeks without sleep. The relentless city traffic, a constant drone from the streets below. Every time I stepped outside, there were more homeless folks, more needles and crack pipes strewn across the ground, more muggings, assaults, overdoses, and deaths. The city had become a wasteland, and I knew it was time to bail. I had no girlfriend, no wife, no kids to think about. My parents had passed a few years prior, and I barely spoke to my siblings anymore. Nothing tied me to that place, where I felt like I was dying a little more each day. That's when I sold almost everything I owned, hopped in my car, and drove up to Alaska to try and make a fresh start. I bought a small cabin and a plot of land nestled among its majestic mountains and dark, enchanting forests. In the winter, the northern lights would blaze forth like the eyes of God, sending out divine trails of light that danced across the sky in cosmic waves. While the move did offer some peace of mind, in the end, the source of all my troubles had ultimately followed me thousands of miles into that endless wilderness. It would take me a long time to realize the cause of all this misery was myself, because, as a wise man once said, "Wherever I go, there I am." I lived in that cabin for 3 months without any major incidents, other than the constant threat of bears, moose, and wolves lurking nearby. I had a rifle and a shotgun for hunting, a small garden in the backyard, and a solar panel to generate electricity. "This is life," I murmured, relaxing on a hammock I had strung across the corner of the cabin while staring at the endless beauty spread out right outside the window. Snow-capped mountains looked like giants towering over thick clusters of evergreens. A pristine blanket of fluffy snow made the entire world glisten and sparkle. There wasn't a house or road in sight. No work, no stress, no pollution, no cars constantly honking. I closed my eyes, breathing in the crisp, clean air. I ended up falling asleep for a couple of hours, waking up just as the sun had started setting, bright orange streaks mixing with the bloody smears of the fading light as it disappeared behind the mountains. I groggily got up, stumbling over to make a cup of instant coffee. As I sipped it, I wandered around the room, looking for something to kill time. There were still quite a few random objects left behind by the last owner that I hadn't gotten around to getting rid of yet. When I moved in, I found a stocked bookshelf filled with classics by Philip K. Dick, Isaac Asimov, and Robert Heinlein. Bored, I started rifling through the collection, looking for something decent to pass the time. As I shuffled past A Maze of Death and Ubik, something caught my eye. A black, leather-bound book with no title or author name sat there, its cover faded with time and wear. Intrigued, I pulled it out and opened it. I saw cursive scrolled across the pages in a neat copperplate script and realized it was a diary left behind by the previous owner. The first entry was dated January 9th, 2015. This is what it said: "I don't know if I'm losing my mind or not. I went into town to talk to my therapist yesterday, and she said I should try writing everything down. She talks to me like it's all in my head, but I know it's not. When I first moved into the cabin, it seemed like paradise. I never thought in a million years that something would be slinking around at night. I never thought it would be hiding under my bed, peeking in windows, and following me like a shadow. Right now, I'm snowed in with a cup of coffee in one hand and my pistol in the other. I can't sleep anymore. I keep hearing something shuffling around under the bed. Sometimes, I think I even hear ragged breathing, as if a corpse with dirt in its lungs had come back to life. I've caught glimpses of that thing in the darkness. Whatever it is, its skin is loose, almost falling off the bone. It almost looks like a naked, emaciated man. Its eyes rotted and dark, its back hunched, its spine twisted and jutting out like tumors. It moves in this slow, jerky way, but I can never seem to catch it. Its body seems broken and out of alignment. Its legs bend the wrong way sometimes. By the time I turn on the lights or try to take a video of it, it's always disappeared, but its fetid odor remains. It lingers in the cabin like a sweet-smelling, spreading infection. I don't know what it wants from me. I want to leave, but with the storm raging outside, I'm stuck here, unable to get all the way back to town. The snow surrounds the cabin in mounds 5 feet high. I feel like a prisoner caged with a rabid beast, not knowing when it will strike. My wife claims she hasn't seen or heard anything, but she keeps vanishing on me. Last night, she disappeared in the middle of a snowstorm. Where did she go? I asked her in the morning, but she said she was here the whole time. She didn't remember anything. There's no way she went into town. There wasn't time, and the trails were impassable that far down. Something's going on here, but I don't know what it is. I'm really scared for our lives. I slammed the diary shut, not wanting to read any further. I didn't want to become infected by some kind of contagious fear. Cabin fever was setting in, and the thought that the previous owner might have lost his mind in these mountains, conjuring visions of naked corpses crawling around, was something I actively avoided contemplating. I hastily returned the diary to the bookshelf, opting for a maze of death instead. I immersed myself in the novel throughout the night, desperately trying to banish the image of the naked, twisting man with rotting eyes from my mind, but it proved impossible. I finally drifted off to sleep just before dawn, but as my eyelids grew heavy, I could have sworn I saw a silhouette in the window, a gaunt figure with unervingly bright, black eyes that seemed to be decaying in their sockets. I imagined his inhumanly long fingers pressed against the glass as he leaned forward. I blinked, sitting up and peering out at the white, snow-covered wonderland. There was nothing there. Another hunter occasionally followed the deer trails near my cabin. A frozen lake lay a quarter-mile away, its surface white and covered in thick drifts of snow. I bundled up, deciding to venture outside for a hike in the frigid dawn. I strapped on my snowshoes and grabbed my shotgun, as I always did when I stepped outdoors. After all, you never knew when a polar bear might be lurking behind the next tree. I opened the door to find footprints pressed into the snow all around my house. Initially, I thought it was that silhouette, the nightmarish figure from the diary, but the footprints didn't lead to my window. They followed the trail 20 feet away, veering off towards the frozen lake at the bottom of the hill. I glanced down in that direction, spotting a black figure plodding slowly forward. "Steve!" I called out, recognizing my only neighbor within a 4-mile radius. He had a cabin about a mile away on his own little plot of land. He jumped, clearly startled by the sudden noise. His black snow pants and heavy fur coats swished together as he spun around, raising his rifle high. When he saw me, he immediately lowered it and raised a gloved hand in a friendly greeting. "Hey Josh, surprised to see you up this early," he yelled over the muted wintry landscape. Sounds always seemed different after it snowed, as if all the noise in the world had become faded and muted. "Yeah, I've been having a little trouble sleeping," I said, slinging my shotgun around my shoulder. "What are you doing anyway?" "Just a little hunting, you know," he said, giving me a sly wink. "Animals are always most active around dusk and dawn, it seems. That's when I always have the best luck. Anyway." He stepped closer to me, staring me in the eyes. "You do look like those bags under your eyes are big enough to carry groceries in." "Yeah, trust me, I know." "Hey, this might sound a little weird, but did you know the previous owner of this cabin?" I asked. Steve's wrinkled old face fell into a scowl. His expression immediately became guarded and distant. Sure, we met," he exclaimed bluntly. He seemed to be searching my face for something, but I didn't know what. His reaction left me feeling off balance and nervous. "Is he still around?" I said. Steve's scowl deepened. "Buddy, I don't know what this is about, but he's dead. Dead. He's been dead. He died in that cabin, actually." He pointed a finger at my home accusingly. With those words, my heart seemed to drop into my stomach. Waves of dread flowed through my body like water. How did he die? Like a heart attack or something?" I asked. Steve's gaze turned downwards. He didn't meet my eyes. "Do you know that Alaska has the highest missing persons rate in the entire United States? It's not even close. In fact, for the population size, we have far more people who go missing and never get found than anywhere else. They even have a name for it. The Alaska Triangle," Steve said. "And we're square in the middle of it." I stared blankly at him, wondering where he was going with this. It seemed like a way to avoid answering my question. "No, I didn't know that," I responded. Steve nodded, raising his head again. He heaved a deep sigh. "Look, the thing with the last owner and his wife, it's somewhat disturbing. If you really want to know, I'll tell you, but it's certainly not going to help your peace of mind, and it definitely isn't going to help you get some sleep." "I want to know," I insisted instantly. The wind started to whip past us, flakes of ice and snow flying sideways in the sudden currents. "Let's go back to your cabin then," Steve said, pulling his heavy, fur-lined hood off and shaking out his long black hair behind him. "I could use a bit of whiskey to warm up." We sat down with a bottle of Johnny Walker and 2 shot glasses. I wasn't much of a drinker, but Steve certainly was. He chugged 3 shots in the span of a minute. I sipped at mine, drinking half and putting it back down on the coffee table with a thunk. Steve grunted, hissing through his open mouth for a moment. "That's the good stuff," he said, slamming his chest as the burning liquor worked its way down. Steve looked up at me with a new sparkle in his eyes. "So, you want to know about what happened to Will Lenning? Well, I'll tell you that no one really knows the whole story. I used to see him occasionally, come down and have a drink and talk. We all know each other around here, obviously." I nodded, motioning him on. He seemed like a normal, upstanding guy. He kind of reminded me of you, actually, a young guy trying to escape the hustle and bustle of the city life. The cancer of the American dream. Well, he was here for maybe a couple of months, I don't know exactly. Everything seemed fine at first. We used to go skeet shooting now and then, have a beer or two, you know how it is. We'd get together with a couple of other hunters who lived closer to town and sometimes play some poker. I never saw anything out of the ordinary about Will. Never could have predicted what ultimately happened to him. He let out a long sigh, his gaze drifting to the rugged mountains outside the window, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. "Well, what happened to him, exactly?" I asked, urging him to continue. He started talking about seeing someone peering in through his window late at night. He talked about hearing sounds coming from under his bed while he was lying there in the dark. Sounds like labored breathing and shuffling. Started keeping all the lights on in his cabin, 24 hours a day. Steve leaned closer, a flicker of fear crossing his pale, lined face. He started to lose his mind, started digging holes all over the place, looking for something, even in the middle of snowstorms. I'd occasionally see him outside, just digging away. Seemed like he never slept anymore. Classic cabin fever, if you ask me. It was only a few weeks later that I came over here, concerned because I hadn't heard from him in a few days, which was pretty unusual. I found the door hanging wide open. Propped up in a chair in the very spot where you're sitting now, Will lay with a blast hole clear through his skull, a shotgun lying at his feet. And right next to him, I found a blood-stained diary open to the middle page. The last entry was speckled with blood spatter but still legible. I remember leaning down and reading it. It was only a few sentences long. I glanced over at the bookshelf, where the same diary rested, saying nothing. It said something along the lines of, "I see now what's going on. The twisted man is leading me to the truth. Today, I will finally find it." And that was his suicide note. I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I went into town and got some rangers to come check it out. Eventually, they got cops and CSI out here. They took all the stuff as evidence, including the diary," he said. "Good riddance, I say. Reading something like that is never a good thing. Sometimes delusions spread like a virus. You know?" I did, but I remained silent. I glanced back at the diary. Its black leather cover gleamed like a coiled snake, and I wondered, if the police took the diary as evidence, how did it end up back here? "You said he had a wife living here with him too?" I asked. "Yeah, she went missing around the same time," he said, shaking his head grimly. "Pretty bizarre. The cops thought maybe she just up and left, but as far as I know, she was never seen again. It was like she just vanished into thin air." After Steve left, I walked stiffly over to the bookshelf, taking the diary down. I flipped it open to the pages in the middle. I found the last entry. Spatters of old, darkened blood were scattered across the page like raindrops. I found the suicide note and read the date, January 27, 2015. It read, "Will Lenning had not lived long after he started seeing the twisted man. I wondered if my fate would be the same." The sun had begun to set outside as I sat with the diary at the small, circular kitchen table, eating some stewed venison and rice. As I read through the entries at the end, Will Lenning said the twisted man had been trying to guide him somewhere, that, in fact, the twisted man had been trying to protect him from some great evil rather than being the source of it all. I scoffed, feeling a flash of anger at his stupidity. His naivety had obviously led to his death. But then a flash of insight struck me like lightning. What if I was making the same mistake? Maybe I should just grab my gun and valuables and leave. I could take off on the snowmobile and be in town within a couple of hours. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't. Something about the mystery of all this beckoned me to stay, like a siren luring sailors to their doom. My curiosity called out to me, and I knew I wouldn't be leaving that night. I needed answers, and sadly, I knew I would find them. I had fallen asleep with an empty beer bottle in my hand. I sat in front of the TV, which only got satellite reception. There were, of course, no cable or phone lines snaking their way through the forest. All of my power came from stored solar energy. Since I rarely watched TV and only really used it to cook or heat up water for bathing, the energy produced was sufficient even in winter. Tonight, though, I needed its sound, its mindless flashing of light and colors and canned laughter. It seemed to drive away the creeping, suffocating presence, like a candle flame. I woke suddenly. The TV flashed with static, the repetitive hissing of the white noise spitting from the speakers like thousands of snakes. I glanced up at the clock. 3:33 a.m. I looked around the dark cabin, confused for a long moment. I didn't understand what had woken me so abruptly. The satellite had never gone out before, either, not even with the howling winds and freezing hail of the Alaskan winter. The TV started flickering, as if the static were rising upwards. Black lines traced their way horizontally across the screen. The hissing deepened into a gurgle, and for a second, I thought I heard faint words behind the white noise. I thought I heard breathing, slow and labored. The static-laced gasp of the TV sounded diseased, like the death gasp of a drowning man. A black line crawled across the screen, and an image flickered into view. Sudden silence descended upon the cabin, broken only by the shrieking wintry wind outside. As I leaned closer, confusion clouded my vision. It looked like a live camera feed of a room. Taking in the details, I realized with a jolt that it was my cabin. I saw myself sitting in the chair, leaning close to the screen. I raised my hand, and the miniature version of me on the screen mirrored the gesture. Ice water seemed to trickle down my spine as waves of dread washed through my body. "What the is this?" I whispered, glancing back to where the camera should be. Only the coarse wooden ceiling filled that corner. Turning back to the screen, I nearly screamed. The TV now displayed a pale, naked man crouching directly behind my chair. With jerky, unnatural movements, he rose, his broken spine twisting and shivering. A hissing voice, thick with what sounded like dirt and writhing maggots, erupted from the speakers. "He is a killer, the shadow of death. Many have fallen. Many lie buried across this forest. You will be next. He is watching you." Long, broken fingers with blackened nails reached out to touch my shoulders. I leaped out of the chair, stumbling backward as I spun around in terror. My back slammed into the TV, sending it crashing to the floor in a shattering of glass and an explosion of light. In those fleeting moments before darkness enveloped me like a suffocating blanket, I thought I caught a glimpse of a pale, sunken face with rotted, blackened eyes peeking out from behind the chair. I switched on every light in the cabin, but there was no sign of the twisted man now. I knew I had to get out of there. The warning the voice had spoken echoed in my mind. If the creature wanted to attack me, why hadn't it just killed me while I was sleeping? None of it made sense. Who was watching me, the twisted man? And if he was, why warn me? Perhaps it was psychological warfare, I reasoned with myself. Perhaps the twisted man simply liked to play with his food before he ate it. Thoughts raced through my head at 1,000 miles an hour as I threw on snow pants and a couple of heavy sweaters and coats. I covered up my entire body as much as I could to try to prevent frostbite. My mind was made up. I had to flee. There was no snowstorm tonight, though the entire landscape was blanketed in it, and I knew the wind chill would be like an ice blade whipping against my skin. It was extremely dangerous to travel in the middle of the night like this in temperatures that might reach -30 degrees. Steve had been right after all. Alaska had the highest missing persons rate of any state, and many of them were never found, their bodies likely frozen solid in the deep snow dozens of miles from the nearest town. I grabbed my shotgun, jumped on my snowmobile, and started heading to Steve's cabin. I hoped I could wait there until the sunrise and then figure out what to do next, but fate would take the decision out of my hands. I felt like there were eyes watching me as I drove along the narrow, winding deer trail. The boughs of the evergreens reached into the path like greedy hands, grabbing at my coat and legs. More than a couple of times, I thought I saw a pale, naked figure standing in the snow, but it had always vanished when I turned to look. I sighed with relief when Steve's place finally appeared in the distance. I could see the lights twinkling through the small windows of his log cabin. I pulled up next to his door. Looking down, I noticed two pairs of footprints there, one much smaller than the other. I found it odd but shrugged it off. The snowmobile cut out with a sucking gurgle. I knocked on the door hard a few times. Steve appeared after a few moments, groggy and half-dressed. He blinked slowly as he looked me up and down. His wrinkled face fell into a frown. "Steve, I need a favor," I said quickly. "Something weird is happening in my cabin. Can I stay here until morning? Until maybe I can go to town or something? I can't stay at my place tonight. I just can't." He nodded, yawning and motioning me in. "You can sleep on the couch, I guess," Steve said. "Put that shotgun somewhere safe, though, boy." He had a partitioned bedroom in his cabin. It was significantly larger than my little one-room cabin, though it was basically still just a joint kitchen-living room, a small bedroom, and a bathroom. He pointed to a well-worn couch in the corner and gave me an apathetic wave as he stumbled back into his bedroom, slamming the door. Couldn't sleep, though. I tiptoed around the room, looking at Steve's bookshelf. He had a rather strange taste in books. Lots of true crime. There, I saw dozens of books about Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, Richard Chase, Herbert Mullen, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Richard Ramirez. Among the collection, at the end, a large black binder stood, unlabeled and worn-looking. It reminded me of the look of that leather-bound diary for a second, and my heart dropped, but logically, I knew this was just a coincidence. Yet still, I pulled out the binder, my curiosity piqued. What I found inside filled me with dread and horror. Countless news clippings covered the length of it. The first clipping was from nearly 20 years earlier, about a woman who went missing in the Alaskan forest while hiking. A later one confirmed that her body was never found, the clipping stated, adding that her family still clung to the hope she might be alive somewhere. A reward was offered for any information, it declared. The following pages echoed the same grim tune. Missing woman, murdered prostitute, missing man, no leads. I flipped through them, a growing sense of unease settling in, until I found clippings detailing Will Lenning's suicide and the subsequent disappearance of his wife. On the article about the suicide, Steve had used a red marker to scrawl "haha" beside it. The chilling click of a gun being cocked echoed from behind me. I froze, every muscle tense, as Steve's voice, a silky whisper, slithered across the room. "So, how do you like my work, friend?" he asked, his tone a grotesque blend of joviality and mockery. I clutched the binder of horrors in my hands, my mouth agape as I stared at this man I thought I knew. "It's you, what? You killed Will Lenning and his wife and a whole lot of other women, apparently." The world seemed to blur, the scene taking on the surreal quality of a nightmare. Steve's grin widened, stretching across his face, but his blue eyes remained cold and devoid of life. "Yes, well, she was cheating on him with me anyway. Just another one, you know. They always get what's coming to them in the end," he hissed, his voice dripping with venomous hatred. "It's too bad, really. I just killed another tonight. I was planning on saving you for later. The urge isn't too bad yet, right now, after all. Comes in cycles, you see. It comes in waves. A flicker of pale, naked flesh writhed behind Steve. With jerky, unnatural movements, the twisted man materialized behind him. I remained silent, watching with wide-eyed horror and a strange sense of disbelief. "You need help, man?" I whispered, the words barely audible. Steve erupted in laughter. "Help? The only help they give people like me is a needle in the arm, you know that. That's why it's important to always cover your tracks." The twisted man ran a long, broken finger across Steve's neck. Steve let out a strangled cry and jumped, spinning around, screaming. I glanced at my shotgun, lying next to the couch. I lunged for it as Steve turned back toward me, firing his pistol twice. The first bullet soared high above me, showering me with splinters, but the second ripped into my leg. An icy, burning pain shot up my shin like a raging fire. I screamed in agony and a surge of battle fury as I gripped the shotgun, spinning and firing. Steve's head exploded as the slug tore through his brain. His forehead collapsed like a smashed melon, bone splinters and blood painting the wall behind him. The twisted man stood there, hunched over, grinning up at me. I felt warm blood gushing from my leg as I stared back at him, breathing hard and ragged. I wondered if I was dying. You weren't after me at all, were you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You were after Steve." But the twisted man remained silent. After a long, pregnant moment, he slinked back into the shadows of the bedroom and vanished. As night slowly surrendered to the creeping dawn, I thought back to the words the twisted man had spoken through the TV, suddenly understanding everything. "He is a killer, the shadow of death. Many have fallen. Many lie buried across this forest. You will be next. He is watching you." He hadn't been trying to hurt me at all. He had been trying to warn me. He had probably tried to warn Will Lenning and his wife too. I wrapped my leg in gauze, gritting my teeth against the pain. The wound looked puckered and deep, but I could still move my foot, and the bullet had gone clean through the flesh. I poured alcohol on it, screaming as the burning sensation seared through my skin. After rummaging through Steve's bathroom, I found some prescription painkillers and swallowed a handful of them with a beer. I knew I would need the opiate high to get through the pain of riding into town with a mutilated leg. As the sun finally broke over the horizon, I made my way outside, leaving the blood-stained floors of the cabin behind me and trudging toward my snowmobile. Before I left, I glanced back at that horrid place, the scene of so much torment and death. In the open doorway, the twisted man stood, his back hunched, his rotted lips stretched into a grotesque grin. His hand lifted into the air with jerky movements and waved. I waved back as I started the engine and headed toward town.